Welcome. Welcome to this gathering of
Every year about this time, Manatee Unitarian Universalist Fellowship begins talking about the funds needed for their next fiscal year that begins July 1. I will be offering 3 sermons on the topic of the spirituality of generosity, exploring it from different angles over the next month. Tomorrow, we celebrate as a nation the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We know his work primarily in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. What we might not be as familiar with was that as the Vietnam War on, Dr. King began focusing his sights on a more encompassing issue that affected a much larger segment of society. He knew that having the right to vote and to live and work in integrated environments means nothing if one does not have the economic freedom to enjoy these basic rights. This vision for economic freedom crossed racial lines. Our reading this morning quoted James Luther Adams saying, "Idolatry in the name of individualism and the free market eschews responsibility for the social consequences of economic power. It has become virtually unaccountable to the general public." Dr. King stated, "Money in its proper place is a worthwhile and necessary instrument for a well-rounded life. But when it is projected to the status of a god, it becomes a power that corrupts and an instrument of exploitation. When people arrive at the point of making money a god, they become more concerned with what they can get out of society than what they can give to society in terms of service. When people bow down and worship at the shrine of money, they are being deprived of their most precious endowment, the possibility of living life in its fullness and its endless beauty." These 2 quotes, Adams and King's, set the stage for understanding generosity in a communal manner, and as such is currently countercultural. The Unitarians were proponents of the value of individualism. It was the individual that could set their destiny, work hard, and be anything that one wanted to be. Our first principle reflects this by declaring the inherent worth and dignity of every person, reinforced by a free and responsible search for truth and meaning and the right of conscience. Our living tradition stresses direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder as one of our sources of our faith. These are all centered on the individual. These principles grew up out of a culture that stressed individualism over the concept of interdependence and communal values of mutual respect and support. These principles and living traditions are important to our faith and are highly valued. Yet, when they are applied to in the extreme, there is a dark side with a faith centered on the individual journey to the exclusion of community. Reverend Cheryl Walker describes her first encounter with this faith in this manner. "I fell in love with being an individual in a faith community. I was like a kid in a candy store. Me, me, me. My faith, my journey, my religion. It's all about me. This religion was created with me in mind, just waiting for the day that I would show up and make it complete." Of course, I didn't say this, but I sure felt it. I could breathe again. I could sing, even if I didn't know any of the tunes, and I did read ahead to make sure I wasn't going to sing anything I didn't agree with. This idea of an individual-based faith is liberating to people who are coming out of faith communities that have creeds and dogmas that the community must adhere to in order to be a member. Liberating, at least at first. Reverend Walker continues, I thought Unitarian Universalism offered me the ability to be in community without losing myself as an individual. This faith community would provide me with the safety and security to explore what I believed, not just what I didn't believe, with the hope of putting my beliefs into action to create tangible changes in my personal life and in the world. It offered me freedom, and I dove right in, headfirst, into the refreshing waters of Unitarian Universalism. Yet I also discovered a shadow side. There was no discipline of faith. It required little of me. All I had to do was sign a book and give some money, and voila, I was a Unitarian Universalist. I found out later that I didn't even have to give any money. This group of people had no cohesion beyond a single congregation, and even within congregations there was little to no cohesion. Everyone had come thinking this religion was made just for them, even those people who had grown up in this faith. Therefore, everyone thought everything should be for them. This wasn't individuality. This was individualism, worship of the individual. When our children grow up and move away and no longer attend a Unitarian Universalist congregation, it is in part because we have taught them that they are responsible for their own path. We have told them they do not need a church community in which to develop into an increasing, fuller, and vibrant self. It is all right for them to leave this faith behind. We are then surprised when our children join a congregation that has strong creeds or dogma, but we have told them the path does not matter. To go and do their own thing is perfectly fine. What they are searching for is community, but we have not provided them with that. We provided them with individuality. Several years back, a member came to speak with me. She was a fairly active member of the congregation. Then she met with me to tell me that she had received all that she could from the congregation, and it was time for her to go her way. Where was she going, I asked. Nowhere in particular. She just didn't see the congregation as serving her needs any longer. She told me she would still be active in social justice activities, but she didn't need a faith community to do that work. She wasn't rejecting the faith, she declared. She could be Unitarian Universalist all by herself. This story was heard repeatedly several times over the years. Individualism. When Pew Research does a survey to find out how people in the United States declare themselves, some 600,000 state they are Unitarian Universalists. When we gather our census numbers of members, that figure is about half. What was it that JFK said in his famous speech? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. It could be applied to Unitarian Universalists as well. Ask not what your faith community can do for you, but what you can do for your faith community. Here we are with this liberating faith that, if we are not careful, can encourage us to create an idol called individualism. Our society has created this idol. Our free enterprise excels when individuals are entrepreneurs. Look at our late 20th century created billionaires: Bezos, Gates, Jobs, Zuckerberg, Oprah. They all have one thing in common. Their individuality helped them to succeed. They are masters at pushing ahead when others said no, impossible, can't be done. All of this reinforces the myth that the poor are temporarily embarrassed millionaires. But individualism, also as Adam states, has served as a smokescreen, an ideology, concealing or protecting a new authoritarianism of corporate economic power. And this corporate economic power has become an oppressive force that sees no responsibility in creating the poverty that over 1/3 of Americans are living. Right now, as we speak, up to 4 million Americans are not getting paid because the government has shut down. In addition to the 800,000 government workers, contract workers who depend on the government contracts are out of work, and they, unlike their government employees, have no hope of back pay. Their income has ceased, and without a safety net, they will fall into the grips of poverty. For what? Because the economic power of the government is being wielded for one individual's desire and not for the uplift of the nation's people. The God of individualism is demanding to be bowed down to and appeased. That is the American way. King understood this economic power. He wrote in 1967, "True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice that produces beggars needs restructuring. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth." This society has created an edifice that not only produces beggars, but also creates the so-called thugs and gangs that provide vast income and wealth for the prison complex. Poverty is a cruel disease that robs people of their dignity and forces them to behave in survival mode. Dr. King, along with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, endorsed what was called the Freedom Budget. It was created by A. Philip Randolph. It was to be a piece of legislation that did more than the civil rights legislation of the 1960s. If this legislation was passed, the proposal stated that for the first time, everyone in America who is fit and able to work will have a job. For the first time, everyone who can't work or shouldn't be working will have an income adequate to live in comfort and dignity. And that is freedom. For freedom from want is the basic freedom from which all others flow. This nation has learned that it must provide freedom for all if any of us is to be free. We have learned that half measures are not enough. We know that continued unfair treatment of part of our people breeds misery and waste, and that are both morally indefensible and a threat to all who are better off. The Freedom Budget had a goal and a strategy to end poverty in America. It had 7 goals to achieve within 10 years. In short, they were full employment, living wage, decent living standard, replace slums with decent homes for all Americans, universal health care, clean air and water, pair full employment with full production and high economic growth. Over 160 signatures from people representing economists, universities, unions, such as the United Steelworkers of America, religious leaders, including the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association at that time, Dana Greeley, and many, many more. All of these issues are still pressing issues today, 50-plus years later. It was this proposal of a freedom budget that was incorporated into King's Poor People's Campaign. It was shortly before the inaugural Poor People's March on Washington that King was assassinated. The march occurred, but the campaign lost steam in the wake of King's death. This concept of a freedom budget has been successfully implemented in Denmark. The driving force behind its success is the belief of solidarity, a sense that the wealth of the nation is first and foremost there for the uplift of its people. It is a spirit of generosity on the national level. This belief is not held in this country. The wealthiest nation on earth has some of the worst poverty on earth. America offers the ability to live in a bubble, safe from seeing the conditions of the poorest among us. We segregate the poor into neighborhoods that we can then safely avoid. We become angry when these neighborhoods erupt in violence because we are then forced to see what we, as a nation of temporarily embarrassed millionaires, have created to protect our God, individualism. And we want to build walls along our southern borders because these are also living in poverty. We do not want to see them. We do not want to be reminded that we are 1 or 2 generations removed from where they are living in desperation. Tomorrow, we celebrate King's birthday. You will hear people talking about his dream and hear some of his quotes. There may be some reports that things have improved since the 1960s. There may be some reports that things have deteriorated since the 1960s. Both of these reports will be accurate from their different lenses. I will ask that we ponder how his quest for economic justice might be further advanced. What is also true is that for all of our nation's wealth, we have not yet evolved to the point where we desire to raise the standard of living in this country for all of its citizens. We still have a pathology that believes if we are poor, it is because we did something wrong. And if we are wealthy, or at the very least comfortable, then we are living righteously. Some time ago, there was a series of tweets that explained how poor whites see themselves. This person wrote, "It is shameful to be poor, to not have the comforts of the middle class. So they pretend that they are not poor. They are willing to lie to make it seem like they aren't poor. They purchase things to make it seem like they're not. In my town, wealth wasn't associated with greed, but with hard work and inherent goodness. You are blessed if you have material wealth." Our liberal faith has learned to recognize and to take steps to root out the idolatries of creedalism, of church or political authoritarianism, of nationalistic, racial, or sexual chauvinism. These are Adam's words. We might call them today fascism, white privilege and white supremacy, and toxic masculinity. But we still have not learned how to recognize destructive forces of individualism while maintaining the individual gifts and diversity we each hold for each other. We still have not learned what is our cohesive truth that creates a beloved community that does not require conformity to white denominational norms. And we still have a way to go to create a spirituality of generosity that is communally centered, that seeks to uplift the whole and not just its individual parts. It may be difficult for our small denomination to change a nation into being communally centered to implement a freedom budget for all Americans. But perhaps, just perhaps, we could all come together to create a spirituality of generosity that is communally centered in this place to help uplift this faith community. What would that even look like? What kinds of programs could we offer if that were to happen? What roles might be taken on to make this happen? Doing so would be a radical shift that would be noticed by all of Manatee County. May a communal spirituality of generosity be nurtured here in new and exciting ways. Blessed be.